Hi there, folks. It's the big 100 WP-Tonic. I never thought I'd make it, folks. I feel like 100. And in this great special show, I should say, we've got one of our most favourite guests. We've got the Viking, Morten.
Hey, I'm
Morten.
I work for Lynda.com of LinkedIn, of possibly future Microsoft. Yes.
Of Microsoft. Yes, the Dark Star has brought you out, isn't it? All right, there we go. And also,
hello, everyone. This is John Locke.
Introduce yourself.
I work for myself at Lockdown Design.
That's great. I never know how he's going to introduce himself. You know, he tries to keep me guessing, actually, folks. So, Morten, thanks for coming on the show. I know you're not being 100%, so it's really, if you pass out during the show, folks, it's got nothing to do with me. It's all the drugs he's taking to get on the show, actually. So, Morten, you know, let's start off with some heavy WordPress, shall we?
Go ahead.
You've written a couple of articles during the... There he goes. You're going to die on us. You've written a couple of great posts during 2016 about the future of WordPress. Would you like to start off with some reflections
talk about things.
Why you wrote those posts?
I don't actually know where to start on that. It's just such a big topic. So
just do what I do. Just blab.
I think
you know,
everyone who works with WordPress kind of knows that we're moving into this kind of shift when it comes to how WordPress is being operated because of the ever upcoming API that seems to get endlessly pushed into the future.
It's like the Mary Celeste.
Yeah, it's like pushing
Celeste,
on the horizon constantly. But
it's on the high rise,
also because of how
the
web at large is changing in terms of how people use it. And if you look outside of the WordPress island and look at what's happening in the rest of the web world, you'll very quickly see that this idea of API-ification of everything is becoming a very strong trend, simply because the way we interact with anything that connects to the internet now, even today, is fundamentally different from how we connected to the internet just a year ago. And the technologies that are on the horizon that are coming, with or without the WP API, will more drastically change this. The expectations that the internet using public has in terms of how to access information on the internet, whether that be through the web or some other means, has also changed. And we are kind of at this, there's a demarcation line somewhere. It's a little hard to see where it is right now, but somewhere there will be a line that we're crossing where we go from this idea of we build these pages that live on the internet that are dynamically generated by WordPress to a point where people will want to gain access to parts of information on your site, but maybe not the whole site, and then commingle that with other information and make it into something else. It's kind of curious to watch what's happening, because we end up with this very strong divide in terms of how the web is being handled. So we have the traditionalist web approach, which is we still build web pages or websites that are dynamically generated and all that stuff, but they live on the web. And then at the same time, we have to build solutions that are accessible without the web, where we, the people who build the content, don't have any control over how it's being displayed on the other end. So the idea is you currently use WordPress to populate a database. Then the visitor uses WordPress to access that content, and then you can intervene and put a ton of plugins and a theme in between there to control what it looks like and how it behaves. Whereas in the future, you would use publish to put content into the database. Then people will choose whether they want to use your theme and your plugins to access that content, or if they just want to come at it from some other angle and pull out just what they need. So that is a thing I think a lot about right now.
So,
oh right, well you lost me, Morten. But no, I think I get the drift because I think just put this too. I think I think what you're trying to say in a way is that we've got this trend where it's all going to be a kind of mashup, where it all comes from all different places and using all different APIs, and it, like I say, use the term, it's going to be one big mashup. But then you got the kind of traditional model where it's WordPress, Joom, I don't know what it is, where you still dynamic web pages, but the reality is it's kind of moving up to this glorified mashup.
and I can see that happening. Where,
what do you reckon, John?
Where we think of like a traditional website is kind of expanding, because the web is just more than like websites now. It's also apps. It's also these databases with APIs that are accessed and used by like other websites. And so I think what you're trying to say, Morten, is in the very near future, like your traditional website is that's going to be like just one of many places where you can access, published content. And that same information is going to be sliced and diced and shipped out to like different places. And you see that already happening, like with, like social networks, you see that happening all the time, like with their APIs, the same thing happening in all sorts of other applications on the web.
Yeah. And the thing that it's kind of hard to talk about this, because the great thing about WordPress is we've established an island where we control everything. The problem with that island is it doesn't necessarily have any connections to what's happening in the rest of the world. And it creates this, we've created this incredible ecosystem that's completely self-sufficient and that is strong enough to entice people to come onto the island and stay on the island and just be on the island and think that that's all there is. And what I'm starting to see is it's almost like the island is calving off parts of itself, and those parts are going to drift quite far away from the island itself. And we're going to end up seeing this weird fracturing where you, on the one hand, have the people who use WordPress proper the way it is right now, and will continue to do that until the end of time. And then you have the other side of it, which are people who will use WordPress mainly as a means for accessing a database, because it's a simple means for accessing a database. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because the interests of these two groups are vastly different. They're also two very different types of people, because the vast majority of the people who use WordPress, as far as I know, and this is based on zero information and just like random hapstance guessing and stuff like that. What is it called? Educated guessing. I think the majority of people who use WordPress, if you think about using WordPress as publish content through some form of platform that is run on WordPress, I would say the majority of those people most likely only know of WordPress in as far as it's a thing I use to publish content. And if you took WordPress away and put something else in their place, they wouldn't necessarily care that happened, because as long as it serves the same function, right? It's just a publishing tool. The people who are looking at these other types of ways of using WordPress are the people that are really heavily involved in development. And their interests lie in expanding WordPress into a completely different realm, to target it towards enterprise, to target it towards large institutions, to target it towards all these other things. And the interests of those two groups are vastly different, because the people who use WordPress mainly as a publishing tool, their only interest is publishing content and having that content seen. They don't necessarily care how that happens. The only thing they care about is if you take away some functionality that makes it harder for them, and then make it harder for them to publish their content or connect to people, right? So like a lot of people are on WordPress.com, and if WordPress.com made it harder for people to like repost their content or see updates of other people they follow or something like that, that would be a disaster for WordPress.com. But for WordPress self-hosted sites, that functionality does not exist to begin with. So there's nothing to take away there. It's kind of the same where you look at, if you assume that the majority of people who use WordPress use it mainly as a publishing platform, and then you shift focus over towards what should we do to target big business or enterprise solutions, and how do we make that better, that almost invariably will water down the features that the majority of users want to use. So I think earlier this year, or maybe late last year or something, I published this article about how we know nothing about the WordPress user, where I basically state that when we the people in this room right now who are talking about WordPress, or if you go to a WordCamp, or if you go to a WordPress forum, or if you go to Advanced WordPress on Facebook, or anywhere where people talk in a fairly educated way about WordPress, that is the 1% of the WordPress community. These are the highly, highly involved people who know everything about WordPress, who know how to influence how WordPress evolves, and who knows enough to say, you could literally call them up on the street and say, hey, I'm having an issue with tags that are not showing up properly. And they might be able to rattle off an answer without even looking at the interface. That is the 1%, or maybe the 1% of the 1% of WordPress users. And these are people that make every decision about what is happening to WordPress. And no one is asking the rest of the users, the majority, what they want, because there's no method for us to get in touch with them, or for them to get in touch with us. The assumption being that because WordPress is this open source thing that everyone has just developed, and you put into it what you get out of it, and this is the thing that we all build together. That works fine when it's a tiny little project that 10 people are involved in, but when there's 50 million sites on the web, there are not 50 million contributors. There isn't. There's maybe a percentage of that actually contribute actively in any way. And that then I say contribute as in show up at some random event at some point, or ask one question in a forum at some point in time. That would then classify as contributing if you want to make it 1%. So we're making a lot of decisions about all of these people without knowing anything about them. And that's becoming an issue, because whenever I interface with a lot of what would be classified as WordPress users who are not part of this 1% group, and basically anytime a major change happens to WordPress, it is an extremely disruptive thing for the end user, usually because they don't know anything about this change. It hasn't been communicated to them. They don't know to go and look at the Make blog and read these epic things that get published there all the time. They have no reason to seek out this kind of information. See, John Locke got so bored he left. But they have no way of knowing, and they have no influencing it, and we're not actively doing anything to find out anything about these people at all. There's no effort being made to reach out to the actual end user, because it costs money and it takes time and it's an enormous project, and it's tedious. And I think what we need in the project as a whole is actually an investment in looking at other people, actually investing in social sciences, do research about WordPress, find out who the real users are, and all that kind of stuff. And that might happen. I don't know. But, there's so many pieces to that. We have to figure out, how are we going to fund it? Who's going to run it? What is the scope of this project? How does this even come about? So what I proposed was, because we have such, because WordPress, the platform, has such an enormous reach across boundaries, across borders, across cultures, across everything, I would imagine the WordPress project would be a tremendous source of data for social scientists. And I propose that we, the community, reach out to social scientists and say, hey, we have a community that you can research that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-everything, that you can reach, and you can look at how they use the internet, how they use the internet to publish things, how they use the internet to connect with each other. There's all this data available. And I think what we can do is reach out to social sciences and say, you should do this. We will give you some sort of access to this information, and bake you into our community and allow you to gather data. And what we want out of it is actual data about the people who use this platform so we can develop a better platform. And I hope that we can figure out a way of funding that, either through the foundation or through some sort of, I don't know, project or whatever, but that we can actually gather money and do an effort to find out about the people who use WordPress, to bring it forward the way that people would like it to be.
Well, I think they're great insights, Morten. But I think we've had there's two aspects of what you just said. The community aspect, obviously, WordPress, and to some extent, I would agree with this, is a very open community and seems to accept people quite readily. But also, it's a very enclosed community, so it's a very contradictory, especially the top echelon in any group of people that any kind of society, organisation of any kind. When it's been around for 13 years, there's a hierarchy that gets established, and there's definitely a hierarchy.
I'd like to see you get someone to agree to that.
So, there's many people in WordPress that deny that, but it's definitely true. But I think when you're on air and in private, we've had some discussions about how that should be dealt with, because I think when you have a very small inner group, and they might be doing things for the best reasons possible, but I still feel it's not the best situation when you've just got a small group of people making such large decisions. But I think the other point I like to get to is about where the internet's going and where WordPress is going. Is that I think you mentioned it last time when you were on the show. I think it was episode 50 when we had a mammoth two-parter. Is that a lot of this is driven by expectations like from Facebook, Twitter, these enclosed systems, the way they're the way that they're easy to use for somebody, much more easier to use than WordPress, and especially on mobile devices, all the resources they're thrown, they give this kind of false impression. I was with a user yesterday using an application that we've built, and I could tell that they weren't satisfied with the speed because they had to log into the back end of WordPress and they had to refresh a couple of things, and they were a little bit impatient because they're used to Facebook, they're used to instant refreshment, instant press and almost, and they just were finding the interface and how it was working.
It's kind of curious when you start looking at the expectations people have about how the web works now, because the general, if you ask the public, when you do the research there, I could dig up numbers on this, but I don't have any way of sharing it here. But trust me when I say this is actually real data. 80% of the web using public expect mobile internet to work faster than in-house internet, which is on the face of it completely insane, because just the fact that you're on a mobile device automatically means the connection that this thing has to the internet is slower than the connection that your computer has if you're in a house that has proper broadband internet. There's a good reason why they expect it, though, and that is if you don't know, if no one has ever told you that when you visit Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or anything else on your phone, you're not actually visiting twitter.com or facebook.com or instagram.com on your phone. You're loading up an app on your phone that uses an API to only pull the data elements and populate them on the fly as you're loading. So in essence, it's the same thing as what we're talking about with these single page apps in WordPress, that you basically load up a skin and a mask, and then you can just dynamically shove in content as it loads. And sort of the same thing happens if you go to Facebook or Twitter. You can see it if you go to Facebook or Twitter and you're unlucky enough that there's something wrong on the site at the time, or if you go and disable your JavaScript, you'll see that in place of content, you just get these gray boxes that illustrate that there should be content here. But what's happening is people have this, the difference between an app and the web on a mobile device is invisible. You can't actually tell if you're on an app or on the web. Then, in addition, we have this weird thing called web apps, which kind of bridge that invisible divide and make it even harder to tell. So in some cases, when you have an app on your phone, where you're actually loading up is an HTML5 page that's cached on your phone that gets populated with content on the fly on your phone. And if you download the app, you would get the exact same experience, and you would have no way of knowing whether you're on the app or on the web app. They are identical and they function identically. So consumer expectations of how the web works are being altered by native apps and web apps. Now, what makes that so complicated is these new apps kind of work contrary to the intent of the internet as a whole, or especially they work counter to the intent of the web, because they are entirely reliant on a bunch of things working in tandem. So for instance, if you go to Facebook, you are reliant on the app loading, whether that's a page app or the web app or whatever. Then you are reliant on JavaScript loading in the browser. And then you have to make sure that the connection is persistent with the server so that you can keep pulling new data. That also means if you reload Facebook twice, you can never get the same Facebook back because it'll always load in whatever is the freshest information. So everyone's had this experience on one of these apps, Facebook or Instagram or something like that, where you see something and then you have to refresh and then it's gone and you go, and then you have to like scroll up and down and try to find it, and it's usually disappeared altogether. And you're like, what, did I dream it? Did it actually happen? And then 3 weeks later, it'll reappear and you're like, why is this here now? I don't understand. Yeah. So the persistence of the internet or the persistence of the web is disappearing really rapidly. And a lot of people are talking about this because it's dangerous. Like there's all this talk about how we publish more content every day now than has ever been published in history before, right? There's this whole thing about like, if you take every piece of paper, like if you print out every piece of information that's published on the internet every day, and then you stack it vertically, it will go like to the moon and back, or like some bizarre comparisons. Like it's like 8 football fields squared in alternate reality, like whatever. We publish an enormous amount of content on the web. Almost none of this content is persistent. Meaning if you come back to that content 10 years from now, it probably won't be there. It'll just not exist. So we're creating this hole in time where information archaeologists will come back and be like, we know nothing about this period of time because they didn't save anything. They made all these really fancy web apps that basically made it impossible for us to know what the hell happened, because there's no continuity to it. There's no persistence to it. Nothing is actually saved. It's all kind of dynamic and in flow all the time. And everything is very ephemeral. It's concerning because we're like, it becomes really hard to find things out. Like when you look at political scandals, right? The reason why political scandals can happen is because you can go back in time and look at what people have said or done or published or whatever, right? And sometimes it's stupid. It's like they go back and they say, well, when this guy was 18 years old, he wrote a letter to the editor of the random school he was at where he said something idiotic. Therefore, he is a moron at age 65, right? And it's like, well, that's not how it works. Fine. But when someone does something 5 years ago that has ramifications today, you can go back in time and look at what was done. We can't do that with a lot of things now because it's not being saved anywhere and it's not persistent. And the crazy part is our community is now actively pursuing this line of thinking, that we're so aggressively pursuing this instant gratification thing and like getting everything up and making everything work really well that we're completely forgetting the whole point here is to store information for a long period of time, not just generated on the fly immediately and then just flash it once and it's gone. And I don't have any solutions to this, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And I think like one of the, someone was asking me about this and I said, I think Robert M. Pirsig, the author of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he's once said that the pen is mightier than the sword, and the pencil is mightier than the pen, because you can edit things that you wrote with a pencil, right? We've literally designed the perpetual pencil with the web. Everything can be edited at all times, and there's no real track to follow to see that it was edited. And you can see this all the time, right? When like someone posts a blog post or anything that's super controversial, and then within it, people freak out about a sentence, and then they'll be like, I don't want to have this conversation, so they just go and take it out. And then it's as if it never happened. And you see it on like Twitter. Someone posts something really offensive on Twitter, and then a ton of people respond to it, and then they remove the offending tweet. And the only way of getting around that now, and you see this all the time, is people will screen grab whatever it was to like save it for perpetuity. But the thing is, I have a screen grab of the Pope saying a bunch of crazy shit. That was never the Pope. It's just that you can go in a web browser and just edit whatever's there and just make anyone say anything, right? You can make a 2,000 line tweet and screen grab that and be like, haha, I know how to make long tweets. But you can, like, none of this is real. You can't actually save information in a proper way anymore. And
yeah, but, Morten, you know, isn't this been, when you were saying that, the classic example was in the Soviet Union where they had photos, and as somebody upset,
they would edit them out of the
Joseph
photos,
and they were bumped off. Their image disappeared. Their image disappeared from the Soviet Union.
Yeah, sure, but
you know, so
now
isn't this
we've built this in
this
as almost a requirement in our platform, right? The web was designed specifically to allow everyone to share data in such a way that we could collaborate on data and reference existing data in the future. The way we're building it now is I publish something. Sorry. I publish something. Someone can reference that, but they have no way of knowing that that reference will ever be accurate, because I can just alter it at any time or take it away or move it to some other location. And there's no persistency to the system. So the whole system breaks down. I mean, the number of times I've seen things referenced on the internet where you can't find the original source is staggering, where you're like, you find an image and you have no way of finding out who it came from because that website is down, right? Or you find a piece of text that references, says like, in this blog, it said, da, 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 and you go to that blog and it doesn't say that. It says something else, right? That happens constantly, and there's no oversight in the system. Like in publishing, there's an oversight system. So if you make an edit to something you published, you have to explicitly say that this is an edit. Here's what it said. Now it says this. There's persistency. On the web as a whole, there is no such persistency system. The only thing we have is like the Wayback Machine, which is arbitrary and doesn't always work. There's a web archive, there's all these other things, but none of it works properly because it all relies on how we build our sites and how we build single page applications that are not supported by that. If you go to, what is it, that music service that went belly up last year? Not Spotify, but it was something similar to that.
RDO.
RDO, or like it was something like that. If you go to the web archive and you look that up, there's nothing there. It's just a white page because it's a single page application. So there's nothing to cache. It just does not exist. It's all shadow DOM, right? So WordPress is now rapidly moving towards that end of the spectrum, which defeats the purpose of, like, in my opinion, it defeats the ideal of WordPress, which is democratizing publishing, because it takes away persistency and basically just pulls it apart.
All right, then, I think we're going to go for our first break, and we'll be back in a moment to discuss more fascinating stuff with our great guest, Morten. Back in a minute. We're coming back, folks. Hopefully, Morten's going to share some more great insights about the internet.
There's like stuff happening on the site here.
The Wizards join us as
there's
well.
A person non-Cassis. I don't know.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Angry Super Mario.
Yeah, there's a chat room too.
Yes. So non-custom says, I guess that's what Google is pushing with AMP.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to mention that earlier. I'm sure John has some things to say about this too. About this idea of ownership of content.
Sure. And
go on, John, go on.
You know, somebody asked that too, like earlier, one of our regular listeners, Christopher, said, is WordPress being taken over by the app writers is nothing more than a revenue generator? Well, any company, no matter how benevolent, revenue is always at the root. It's always at the core. And what you described in the last segment, like Morten, it's very like with link rot and with these dynamic single page applications that are just generating like content on the fly. It leads to a situation where it's very much like a Ministry of Information, like situation where nothing is. Nothing is really verifiable because it can always be edited. And in a lot of cases, like it just disappears, and we see that with companies being acquired constantly. A lot of the big sites, they get acquired after maybe like 5 years. And so a lot of that information disappears because now they're suddenly taken over by companies, and terms of service change, like your data is compromised, your data is sold off to the highest bidder. Yeah. I'm just talking about the world in general, man.
Are you talking about Hillary Clinton here? Yeah, we've got. I thought I had to mention that because we've got our
96 episodes,
great,
man.
Friends
And, I'm teaching you to podcast. You're doing a pretty darn good job, and you're using Blab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the voice of my former regular co-host, Bill the Wizard.
Yeah. I got to make one statement real fast. All the folks out there. I had a TSSCI. I worked overseas. I had to go out brief. If I had 54 people, I had 2 IT managers. If I gave my IT manager $5,000 and said, "Hey, go hook up the secret into the unclass and then send it over to my BlackBerry or I use iPhones," they'd do an investigation of 15.6. They'd find me. About 6 weeks later, 9 weeks, I'd probably go to Leavenworth. Yeah. So there's no justice here if that doesn't happen. So that's just into the politicals. You got me into politics. So I gotta say that's the only thing I'm saying from now on. Every time I go on somewhere,
he's been highly political there, but I thought that kind of. Yeah, you do, Bill. But it does kind of link into what Morten was saying. Everything handles.
Can we send her to Canada?
Everything's kind of temperate.
To the Prime Minister of Canada instead.
I think considering the alternative, we might all have to.
There's no choice. There's just no choice this cycle.
Right, so what do you, to get back onto WordPress, Morten, is anything that really caught your eye that you're planning some courses on, or you think, that really you think is really interested in the subworld of WordPress that you've been studying, maybe thinking of it?
So
that needs,
right now,
that needs a course,
this
that
week
needs
and the previous
more
one,
information about it.
I've been sick most of the time, so you're lucky because now I sound normal. My voice just disappeared last week completely, so I sounded like some sort of weird squeaking door or something. But I've been working on a course about SVGs and how to use SVGs in different ways in different permutations. And there's a section there on how to include them into WordPress themes and mess around with them. And I think, SVGs are scalable vector graphics.
Can you explain to the audience?
Basically, you know how when you work with Adobe Illustrator, you instead of making a pixel graphic, you just draw splines, and then you say, so this line is going to be like 5 pixels thick, and then inside the line is going to be blue, and outside line is going to be red. Well, with SVGs, you can do the same thing in the browser. You basically just provide the browser with this XML document, which is what it is, that has a bunch of points and a bunch of splines, And then you say, so here's a path, and here's another path, and the first path is red, and the other one is orange. And then you basically get the browser to draw the graphics on the fly. It's magical. Like SVGs are the closest thing you'll ever get to the holy grail of web graphics, because they live as documents on the site. So you can, the truly magical component happens when you take an SVG, which is essentially an XML document, and then you embed it into the live page, so inside the DOM. Because once it lives inside the DOM, you can apply JavaScript to it and alter the points. So you can animate any point within the SVG, or you can apply CSS to it and just treat it like any other CSS element. So that means apply colors to the stroke, apply colors to the background or to the fill, and apply any other CSS effect you want. So you can use CSS animations on it, you can use JavaScript animations on it, and you basically have this crazy ability to animate graphics in the browser. You can make, and if you do it right, you can like split all the different elements within an SVG into separate layers in Illustrator and then export them out, and then you can treat them individually with your old. It is mind blowing. The challenge is we're not used to working with SVGs at all. It's a very foreign way of working with graphics, because we're used to two types of graphics: are the reference graphics, like regular images that live in a separate file, and then you just say image URL or RC, and then it's over there. So cut a hole, put that thing over there in this hole. Or you work with backgrounds where you just say, here's a box, and in the background of this box, I want you to use this image. And then as a stopgap, we have these icon fonts where we basically say, here's a font. The font type just happens to be a house. So don't read that because it's like a random glyph. Instead, just display the icon as it is. And then we did a bunch of workarounds. Well, SVGs allow us to tell the browser, here are all the instructions you need to draw this vector of a house. And you can use it to any size you want. You can just scale it back, make it huge, make it small. You can apply any color you want. You can make it layered. You can make it multicolored. It has all these tremendous new features that we don't have. But no one's used to using them, which is crazy because SVGs were ratified in W3C in 1999. So this is not new technology. This is like ancient technology that just never came around. So the course is about how to use it. Basically, here's a bunch of things. Let's put them into pages. And then because this is not supported across all browsers, you need to use all this crazy shit to get them to work across all browsers. So it also has like, here's a method and here's how to fix it. Here's another method and how to fix it. And then if we combine these two, we get this other thing. But then you have to use this other thing to fix it. And then here's a command line method you can use to fix it. And then this is the other method you can use to fix it. And then sometimes you can use this. So yeah, it's just convoluted. And I'm trying to unconvolute it in this course.
Yeah, but Morten, I understand where you're coming from, but the problem isn't the problem. Yeah. Somebody has to produce those images with that technology, and it takes a lot of work. Where taking a raster photograph, well, I say that taking a really good raster photograph is a lot of hard work, but actually taking images compared to producing really good vector art is a lot easier. And as you were saying this, it kind of struck me back the recent biography of Steve Jobs, where he bought was it Electric Light, and he had these ideas that they were going to produce really easy to use 3D software, and everybody when they were given these tools, they would just go and make 3D animation.
Okay, so basically we currently have all these font libraries with icons, right? Like Font Awesome and Iconic and all these things, right? All of those graphics are available as SVGs. You have the WordPress dash icons are available as SVGs. Pretty much anything that exists right now, like social media icons or anything else, already exists in some sort of library. So you don't need to be a graphic designer to do this. It's more a question of how do you take these SVGs and make them work on your site, right? You can make them yourself too. It's actually not hard. I would say once you get used to it, it's easier than making regular graphics, but but this, John had an important question there. Why are SVGs not you can't, okay, sorry, I'm going to rephrase this. You can't upload an SVG into WordPress. If you go to WordPress and you try to upload an SVG, it'll be shut down. And people ask about that all the time, right? And I think there's a track ticket open on it, and a lot of people are wanting to fix it. And the simple answer is, as I said, an SVG is a markup file. It's an XML document. You can put whatever you want in that document, like crazy shit that should not be on your site at all, under any circumstances. More importantly, unless you open the document in a code editor, you won't know what's in it. And a lot of SVGs will have base 64 encryption already, so to minimize them, at which point you actually have something you don't know what is, that's code base that you are putting onto your site. So it's a major, major exploit possibility, which is, an obvious reason to prevent it. And it's not something that you can easily write a script to test for, because SVGs are weird as hell when you look at them, and you can cram so much crazy stuff into them. No,
it does sound a bit.
You just shouldn't. No, it's not a problem at all.
Problem,
I think SVGs live well as tools for plugin developers, for designers, for theme developers, but they shouldn't be used as basically portable graphics that you can upload into a post or page, right? More likely, I would suggest something like, if you figure out a way of uploading a regular vector graphic, then you could have a process in the background, like a command line process that would convert it to an SVG to be displayed. That would make sense, right? Because then WordPress controls how that SVG is generated, and you can make sure that it gets escaped and sanitized properly so that it doesn't just output garbage. But the challenge is, if you take the SVG as is and upload it, you're just, it's insane, because it becomes part of the document object model. Like, it's not a referenced object. It lives inside the HTML alongside all the content. So whatever you cram in there will just be rendered by the browser on the fly, and you can do the most insane stuff with this. So
that was actually the question. He
great.
answered it.
John, you got a question?
And my question was, it was something that we were talking about on Twitter the other day. And I was just asking him to explain why it's, because a lot of people do ask about that. And especially say like end users or clients, or I would say actually like people who build websites. They often ask, or they often want to add the code to be able to upload SVGs directly into the media library, just for easy use. And basically it was just asking, like, explain why that's a bad idea and why you would like want to inline that, or, not just upload them directly into the media library.
Yeah, it is a perfectly legitimate desire to want to be able to upload SVGs into WordPress. For the most practical reason I can think is you could ship a theme and then say that you can upload an SVG logo to the theme, right? And the obvious question is, why on earth can't you do this? Like, then you get a properly scalable logo that works every time. Why does it have to be a raster logo? It's stupid, right? But the answer simply is it is a tremendous opportunity for people to do bad shit with your website.
Yeah, and you were saying another area that I feel needs a lot of work is the media library itself. I feel it's getting a bit clunky now, and it needs to be
the media library.
Would you agree with that, Morten?
Yes, you should take like a bucket and then put it in the bucket, and then the actual media send the bucket away, and then obtain a new bucket and then build a whole new media library. That's what should happen. But, WordPress needs to be backwards compatible to 1847. So that's not going to happen. There's a lot of talk about that too. I mean, I saw a post the other day, I think on Make, about someone saying, this needs rewriting from the ground up. The challenge, like what I've come to realize when I started talking to a lot of core developers, is the biggest challenge with any new feature in WordPress, and I don't think people fully understand this, is no change to WordPress is ever made without providing proper fallback to ancient code. And the basic reason for that is you never want someone to update their WordPress installation and have their site crash because of some old legacy functionality. And the way that would happen is they would use a theme or a plugin or some code that sits somewhere that relies on functionality in WordPress that suddenly doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Now, that said, over the last couple of years, you have actually seen a couple of features been updated in WordPress that cause breaking changes, that where a function, the output of a function has changed so drastically that if you relied on that function, it would no longer work properly. There was like the was that the way that meta? No, the term meta, I think, is one of them, where the way that relationships internally between terms got messed up. So they changed that. So if you wrote a plugin that relied on that functionality, you would have to rewrite it. But the only times that so far the core team has been willing to make these breaking changes, if they are very peripheral, so things that rarely happen to begin with, and there are very few plugins or themes that rely on it. But when you're talking about something like the media library, there are a billion, I'm sure, probably a gazillion themes and plugins that do something with the media library. Not just in that it relies on you to be able to upload images, but they use functionality within the media library to do something, or they add functionality to the media library. And at that point, you need to, if you rewrite the whole thing, you then have to say, how do we capture every possible permutation of the way it used to work so that it doesn't break for that one person who's still using this old plugin from 2004 that for whatever reason, because even that one person matters. And it's a really, on the one hand, it's an amazing attitude to have towards software development, to say we're not going to leave anyone stranded ever under any circumstances. But considering the scale of WordPress and the breadth of reach, it's really dangerous because, well, it's not dangerous, but it's really prohibitive to do things because you really can't get anywhere. You run up against this, but you need backwards compatibility to things. So we can't change it without writing backwards compatibility to it. So in the end, you'll basically end up running two entirely separate media libraries, one old one and one new one, which would be insane, right?
Right. Yeah, I can see it, Morten. We're going to go for a break, folks, yes. And we'll be back and we'll finish off. And before Morten dies, we let him go. So we'll be back in a second, folks, and we're going for our break. We're coming back, folks, and just to finish off with our great special guest, it's much appreciated, Morten from lynda.com. So, Morten, how can people get hold of you if they want to find out more about yourselves and
the easiest way to get a hold of me is on Twitter. I am Morten. That's my name. That is MOR10 or 10 because no one spells my name right ever. You can also find my Lynda courses at lynda.com/Morten, or you can find me on my blog at Morten.com. It's pretty straightforward. It's just MOR10 whatever. Except for Instagram. For some reason, that Morten is some imposter. So on Instagram, I'm like Morten Graham or something like that. So, yeah. No, he's not an imposter. Like, he doesn't try to be me.
Folks,
he's just some other person with the name Morten who's signed on to Instagram before I did.
All right. I was getting.
Hey, the best way is to go to Podcaster's Home and find my links there and contact information. But also, my project that I'm working on is netcastschool.com. And one of the problems I have, and I got to work this out, is you got to actually register before you can see the courses. And then you can buy them. And they're cheap now. It's cheap for life, and they suck, but the courses suck right now. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And guess what? I had to go see
He's working on it. He's disappeared for weeks working on it.
Too much time with Jonathan.
Well, because the courses
came out okay. Hey, Psycho. You don't want to go into detail?
All right, we won't delve into that. I think
easiest way is go to my website, lockdowndesign.com, or find me on Twitter. I'm lockdown_. Tell everyone how they can get a hold of you, Jonathan.
Oh, there, I'm quite easy. Just go to the WP-Tonic website. Either go to my Twitter feed at Jonathan Denwood, or just email me, folks, at jonathan@wp-tonic.com, and I always answer my emails. And I love people. And please subscribe to the podcast.
You just said, I love people. I love people too.
I think he does.
What was that, Morten? Yeah, I love the comments. Feedback's great. But Morten, thank you so much for coming on the show. Morten's not been that well, but he still dragged himself out the semi-deathbed to join us. He's one of our most
I'll try to.
He's on
I'll
our
be in
panel as well.
WordCamp Europe next week, though, so that ain't gonna happen. But
where is it? Where is it in Europe?
In Vienna.
Wow.
In Austria.
Where is it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I have not been in Central Europe yet, so
beautiful city.
I'll go and practice my awful German.
I was going to ask.
Severely yelled at by German people for my awful German, which is I cannot fully express how bad it is.
Can you understand Dutch very well when you're?
I understand some German. It's just I had the worst German teacher, so she completely ruined my ability to speak German. So I did not. You need to have.
Well, you're lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Beautiful city. So, thank you so much for joining us, Morten. It's been great stuff. You're one of our favourite guests, and folks, I just want to say something. I don't want to build Morten's ego too much, but Morten is one of these guys that what you see on the internet, and he's a really great guy. What you see on the courses and here is exactly what you get when you meet Morten in person. He's one of the most down-to-earth, genuine people in the WordPress community. And thank you so much for joining us, Morten.
I'm gonna go lie down.
You can go now, Morten. You can go off and die quietly now. Right, we're going to say goodbye, folks, on the recording. Bye, 100.